Okay, the final panel, which I think will bring together a lot of the different issues that we've spent the last 2 days discussing. Building partnerships of winners is the name of this conference, and it's been very clear to me, listening to the discussions today and yesterday, that on one hand, we're in a race against time. The pressures on the world's natural resources are intense, and they are growing, and there is a real sense that the time to act is now, and the more effective the actions and the more of them, the better. And I think there's also been a realization and a recognition that in pragmatic terms, the quickest and most effective way to accelerate progress on the sustainability issues that are close to our hearts, whether it's economic sustainability, social sustainability, environmental sustainability, the quickest and most effective way to actually move forward and get progress will be through partnerships and collaborations, not between NGOs, not between private sector companies, not between governments, but between all of them together. Don't expect and wait for governments to sort it all out. That's not going to happen. It's going to be through broad-minded collaboration and partnerships between these different stakeholder groups. And I'm really happy that they chose this Building Partnerships as the subtitle for the Zermatt Summit, because I think that's been borne out in the discussions that we've had today and yesterday. Really, it is all about partnerships. I'm probably a lot happier about building partnerships of winners than I am about the tiny subtitle under Zermatt Summit, Humanizing Globalization. I don't know what to think about that. What is globalization? It's a process of international integration, and that covers trade and products, the interchange of trade and products between countries, but it's the interchange of worldviews, it's the interchange of ideas and culture. And I don't know about you, I actually champion globalization and I celebrate it. We were invited to celebrate in the last panel. I don't expect you all to celebrate globalization, but at least try and leverage it, and don't think that it's something not human about globalization. It is completely human and natural. And we've spent time contemplating the effects of hundreds of millions of new people joining the middle class and the pressures that that's going to put on the planet, and how can we stop them getting on planes and traveling. I've enjoyed, as I've been here in Zermatt, having the opportunity to get out of the conference center and walk up and down the main street and see Chinese people and Malaysians. I saw a woman in a burqa. I hope, if I'm invited back in future years to the Zermatt Summit, I'll see Brazilians and Africans and Peruvians walking around. I'm a fan of globalization. As I said, I don't expect you to be, but at least recognize it and don't say it's something to be humanized, because it is perfectly human and natural. Now, I've got that off my chest. Let's turn to the topic at hand. Partnerships. The good news is that these cross-stakeholder partnerships exist. We've got empirical case study evidence that shows it. Here are a few. In Tanzania, Royal DSM, big Dutch life science and material science company, and World Vision, a big development organization, are working on a program with local government and civil society which tackles undernutrition and stunting, which is such a huge issue. And they're doing it. They've got that partnership off the ground. In Ethiopia, the World Food Programme are working with Pepsi and USAID, partnering with local governments and farmers to fund better seeds and drip irrigation systems so that farmers can improve the yield of chickpeas. In the Philippines, GIZ, the German government agency for international cooperation, are partnering with BASF, the big German chemicals company, and Cargill, the big grain trader, working with local NGOs to develop a certified coconut oil supply chain. As we heard yesterday, in China and Bangladesh, WWF and H&M are partnering with governments, NGOs, and local companies to support better management of river basins. In Kenya, the Syngenta Foundation, Safaricom have got a project called Kilimo Salama, which is Africa's biggest agricultural insurance program that reaches smallholder farmers through their mobile phones and allows them to have crop insurance. Previously, they had none. If there was a drought, it was a calamity for them. And one that I was reading about today, Refrigerants Naturally. It's not the catchiest name, but it's the UN Environment Programme, UNEP, and Greenpeace, working with companies like Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Unilever, and Red Bull to get them to start using climate-friendly refrigerants, basically the things in their coolers and fridges that keep drinks cool. And they're estimating, they've already estimated that by November 2012, that initiative had allowed those companies to phase out over 1 million tons of CO2 emissions. So there you go. There's a few partnerships. So the good news is that they exist. The bad news, or the issue, is that it's easier said than done. Now, I rather casually just listed through a whole list of partnerships there. I rattled them off. But the reality is that each one of those partnerships and collaborations must have been incredibly complex and painful, full of trial and error. I must say, I would like to have been a fly on the wall for that Refrigerants Naturally first meeting when they introduced the guy from Greenpeace to the guy from Coca-Cola. Brian from Greenpeace, this is Tony from Coca-Cola. Go on, shake hands. It's not easy, which is an understatement, to build trust between these unnatural partners. And that's one of the things that I want to discuss in the panel, is how you do that. How you align the goals, the skills, the capacities of different types of partners so that the whole thing works and everybody can live with it and everybody can get out of it what they want, because ultimately our goals might be quite different. The guy from Greenpeace probably wants to achieve something a bit different from the guy from Coca-Cola. So we're going to talk about the barriers that you need to break down to create a partnership of winners, and we'll try and give you some practical examples, some do's and don'ts, some lessons of how you can set up and structure and run and govern a winning, effective partnership. Now, we've got a great lineup to talk us through these issues. On my left, Father Nicolas Boutet, founder of the Philanthropos European Institute. To his left, Marcello Palazzi, the director of B Corporation Europe. We've then got to his left, Mark Foster, the chairman of the International Business Leaders Forum. And finally, at the end, Rob Cameron, executive director of Sustainability. And I'm going to bring them into the conversation one by one, as is the style. But please do start thinking now about questions that you would like any of them to answer, because we will cram as many of your questions in as we possibly can. Maybe I can start with Mark. To use your experience and your business background to talk a little bit about how business views and approaches towards the kind of collaborations that I'm talking about are evolving. What are the trends that you see? What are the areas where these partnerships can succeed? Where can they be most effective? The do's and don'ts, the lessons that you have learned about this kind of partnership.
Thank you, Dougal, and delighted to have this opportunity to speak and talk to the group and engage, hopefully, in some dialogue as we go forward. I actually feel that I'm actually, given we're talking about the relationship between government, NGOs and business, ironically, I find myself wearing all three hats in some sort of way. So I feel like a bit like a PPP on legs in terms of my personal life experiences. I did spend 27 years at Accenture, and I ended up running their global management consulting practice around the world, and I've taken on board all the interesting comments about management consultants that have been made over the course of this meeting so far. But through that process, I also saw Accenture itself as a business go on its own journey around becoming a sustainable business and thinking about its own way of engaging with the wider society that we live in. Since I've retired a couple of years ago, I've also taken on a role with the UK government, and on behalf of the UK government, I'm one of 4 commissioners who oversee the 10 billion of aid that the UK spends in development around the world. And out of that, I mean, I've gained a huge insight, frankly, about the complexity of these development issues we're talking about and the scale of the problems that we're talking about. And I think it's that kind of awareness, because I was very used to seeing the kind of projects and programs we worked on in Accenture. But when I start to see the scale and the nature of what's going on globally, and spending 2 weeks ago in a Palestine refugee camp, or a month before that in the northern reaches of the Ganges in Bangladesh, looking at people whose homes were washed away every year by the river, you gain a completely different sense, I think, of the nature of the issues that we're dealing with out there. And then finally, I am the chairman of the International Business Leaders Forum, a group that for the last 25 years has worked to bring business leaders together with these development challenges, and indeed out of that has in fact developed quite a lot of intellectual property around how you try to create working cross-sector partnerships. So that's kind of what I'm trying to use as my background for the comments I'm about to make. I will say that I feel that we are at a pretty critical point. I think we've heard over this summit both what I call the glass half empty and the glass half full view of this situation. I think we're facing a really potentially major credibility gap around cross-sector partnerships as a vehicle to really make a difference at this moment. And we can go one way or the other, and I want to put some comments out there about what I think about how we should navigate that particular journey. Because cross-sector collaboration has been, if you like, the silver bullet that's been out there for a very long time right now, right from Rio in 1992, through Joburg, through Rio Plus 20, through the meetings in Busan. Everyone says the answer is cross-sector collaboration. And if we look at the MDGs, when we look at those MDGs, and MDG 8, which said it was about developing development partnerships, was a critical part of the MDG architecture, one could argue of all of those objectives, that objective is the one we're probably furthest off achieving as we look around at the world right now. So there's I think some big challenges there. We've had this thing held out as the solution, and yet actually we have some question marks about how successful we've been in actually making it happen. Having said that, clearly there are, as we've just heard from Dougal, some fantastic examples out there. We've heard many over the course of this summit. There are many both businesses that get it. There are many NGOs that get it. There are many governments that are beginning to get it in terms of how they think about their donor funds and engaging with the private sector. And we can certainly see some fantastic initiatives, whether it's industry initiatives or, as I say, regional initiatives. Many great examples of people coming together to really try and make this work. And there are some working partnerships that are out there, and some beacons that we can look at. It's interesting if you put the test over them, though, in terms of them being sustainable partnerships. And the test of the ones that they've actually had scale impact. So for me, the test sometimes is, have we actually been able to move from a great idea where we could come together and do something tangible at a certain scale, but can we move it up to being at genuine, meaningful scale? And the second one being, is it sticking? Because with my role as a commissioner for the UK government, the test we have of impact for our aid journey is it making a difference to the people whose lives it's supposed to be affecting, and is that difference lasting? That, at the end of the day, is the definition of, I think, of impact. So I think as I look at this, the examples are great, but if we look at the scale of the examples and the scale of the activity, and we put it against the scale of the problems we're trying to solve, there's a big gap in between. And the question is, can we see a way that we can close that gap through these kinds of partnerships? There are challenges. There really are some challenges to this. And I think actually Guido mentioned quite a lot of them this morning. I mean, there actually aren't so many success stories. There are some, but there are also quite a lot of failures in this space. There's also, we're doing this, I think, against a real world of fragmentation. One of the things that strikes you, if you do travel around these countries and see the challenge we're trying to face, is how many actors are trying to solve the issues, whether it's a proliferation of NGOs, a proliferation of initiatives, a proliferation of companies trying to do things. So the fragmentation, I think, is a real challenge, and to see through the noise to get to a place where you can actually really make a difference coherently. There is a problem still about language. I think that public-private partnership language has been used to cover a wide range of things, some of which truly are public-private partnerships as we would see them aimed at aid, aimed at development. Others I see as just trying to bring groups together for another kind of purpose. And so I think the language is mixed. Shared value has been a confusing language. Win-win, as we've heard today, I think is confusing language. So the language of interaction, and that I think also leads to fundamentally between the parties here, do we really have trust? Trust has been a big word in this meeting. And clearly, if we look back over a 10-year period and compare it, the trust has moved massively between these parties, at least at the level of some degree of mutual understanding of objectives. I think when you move it towards real trust at the point whereby you're putting your sort of business on the line alongside an NGO, or an NGO being comfortable to really have their brand stuck really strongly aligned over the long term with the business, and moving beyond maybe an expedient relationship to a deeply trusted long-term relationship. Those, I think, are some big questions for us that I think are still out there in terms of breaking that down. And that comes back to me to leadership. I think if we look at leadership, there clearly are fantastic examples, both of NGO leaders and of business leaders and government leaders who are trying to stick their head over the parapet on this stuff, but they're few and far between. And again, the trouble is when a leader steps down, does the momentum carry on in the sustainability of the solutions that we're trying to drive towards? Often it doesn't. There is this fundamental time frame disconnect too, that the time frames that a business looks at, that an NGO looks at, and that a government looks at are all very different. Ironically, governments are often the shortest time frame in that model. We think that governments ought to be longer term, but governments actually often have the shortest time frame and horizon in this picture. And actually, beyond that, it's interesting whether NGOs or business work to a longer time frame. Often NGOs now are frankly very much looking at this year's funding round, and businesses may be having a slightly longer perspective. It depends on the nature of the beast. And behind all of that, I think, is a real question about putting the money where your mouth is around all of this. I was involved about a year ago in a discussion with the UN Global Compact about creating a hub for the lead organisations that were the 10 most committed organisations to the UN Global Compact, to create a hub for cross-sector partnerships to be created. And that hub was asking for $4 million from the 10 companies. They couldn't get the $4 million from the 10 companies, who are the most committed companies in the UN Global Compact, to establish a collaboration hub. I think that starts to put a question on the table around against scale, real investment, and where we sit with that. So I think that's leaving us with this big gap between what I call the top-level dialogue and the fact that every one of these global initiatives puts this on the table, the bottom-up examples, but the gap in the middle and trying to close it. Having said that, I don't want this to be a council of despair, because I think if it is a council of despair, we haven't got many other places to go looking for a solution. And so I think if we start thinking about where we could start to see some good examples and some things that are working, and maybe looking forward to some success factors, some ideas that I would put on the table would be, firstly, just having clarity, honest shared goals. And by that I mean really being clear about what we're actually mutually trying to achieve at a strategic and overall level in terms of these goals. And I don't know whether the new SDG framework will prove to be more successful than the MDG framework in creating a framework that actually has a chance for business, NGOs and governments to have a shared language of a stronger nature that can then be translated down to regional, local and other manifestations in a way that makes sense. But clarity and honesty of those goals, I think, is very, very important. Having a rational architecture that's easy to understand to actually get onto. I mean, one of the problems, again, for businesses engaging or NGOs engaging with businesses is understanding where to start. What are the platforms that the people can actually engage with? We have a lot of these hub ideas that are out there. Can they actually get off the ground? Everyone's talking about hubs, but can they actually create hubs? What will be the architecture? Bottom up, top down? How will they be created? But there's an opportunity there. Most importantly, I think, for this whole discussion is how do we get the voice and frankly the governance and leadership from the intended recipients and beneficiaries driving this process. A lot of what this feels like still is us collecting together to push, as opposed to responding together to a pull. And how you then engage the governance models of all these players to respond appropriately to a pull, I think, is something that if we can do that will make a big difference. And I think this really does put up the real focus on leadership, and bold leadership that's prepared to be radical, that's prepared to stick its head over the parapet, that's prepared to say it doesn't matter if we fail quite often because our long-term objectives are still being achieved. And I don't just mean business leaders, I do mean NGO leaders, and I mean governmental leaders as well. And can we finally, really, at all these three levels, embed these ideas in long-term strategy? Because if I look around the business world and I look beyond Unilever and Nestlé and a few others, and we heard a great example, of course, this afternoon as well, very few companies have truly embedded all this stuff deep into their strategies. And very few NGOs have embedded partnering with corporates deeply into their strategies. And very few governments have said, we're going to make public-private partnerships our fundamental building block of change. And until that's done, I think we're certainly sort of behind the ball. And finally, I think we are at a dangerous moment in all of this. So while I can see a path ahead, and the examples that I've given, I think, are ways that one can imagine working through this, the truth of the matter is that when we sit in these rooms, it's often the same faces. And we are talking to ourselves, and we are the ones who get it, and we're the ones who believe all this. But there are thousands of companies, thousands of NGOs, thousands of government officials who are not in these rooms, who still don't get it. And so where we are on the journey of awareness is a long way behind, and I do wonder about that, because we've now been talking about this for 20 years, and we haven't moved the needle. So how do we do that? The other thing I think is a challenge is governance chaos. It was mentioned in the last session. The world is not being governed in a rational way that can help us navigate this architecture. It's actually quite chaotic. And so will we find a pattern that everyone can engage with? The ongoing financial crisis creates a big problem. Money is being pulled back from this area. I genuinely think if you look at what companies are spending on it, the oxygen that governments have to spend in this area, it's less now than it was before. And although some can say that's because we're embedding it in our core operations now, the reality is that there's been less investment now for the last period of time, and that is a real problem. And my last and most worrying point is, where are the leaders going to come from? I mean the next generation leaders, because one of the other collateral effects of the last 6 or 7 years has been leaders who've had to have their heads down, managing and surviving. Have they been, the young leaders and the young generation, looking out and thinking about the bigger picture and understanding the wider world they're living in enough? So have we created a group we can hand the baton on to with comfort, or are there actually going to need to be a whole education process for that group to get this and really then and they run with the ball in the way they need to? Having said all that, I am hopeful. It may not sound like it, but I do feel there is I do feel there is hope. But the hope, I think, is going to come, ironically. Yes, we've got to organise ourselves and engage in this in the right kind of way. But I think the biggest hope comes from the fact that I do think there could be a citizen and consumer and the receivers-led approach to this, that they will be the ones who will make this actually happen, from the pull becoming actually an industrial strength pull from actually the recipients, the citizens and the consumers around the world, in both the developed world and the developing world. And I think that will actually force us to get our act together, and out of that will come a positive outcome. Okay,
great. Thank you very much, Mark. You've posed a lot of big issues and challenges there already, and we'll return to them. Marcello, perhaps I can bring you in and ask you a similar question, which is basically your sense and experience of the challenges associated with these kind of partnerships and the steps to success in making them work.
Sure. Well, great. Thank you very much. Delighted to be here. Just a word of introduction. I was a young entrepreneur in 23, 24 when I started studying the link between ethics, theology, entrepreneurship, looking at family businesses throughout history. And that led me a little later on to start the foundation with two partners, a Dutchman and an American, where we wrote a book about the civic economy, which really looked at how you converge the interest of the private sector with the interest of societies, which is very close to this notion here of the common good. We wrote a book about public-private partnerships. This is 25 years ago. We later expanded this model to the 4 Ps, public, private, philanthropy, people, which has really basically been the formula we have used in over 300 projects in 30 countries in the last 25 years. So I'm a big fan of all this agenda. And I've also been being a fan of the work of IBLF over the years, fantastic example. But having said so, what I've seen happening and sometimes been involved with are additional streams of action. We have seen them here. The social entrepreneurs. We had Ashoka here. We had other examples of organizations that actually come out from a different ecosystem. They were not major multinational, they were not governments, they were not traditional NGOs, they were social entrepreneurs. I think they've done a lot. What I see increasingly is the next generation entrepreneurs, people who are 25, 35, who want to start and are starting new companies in clean tech, in microfinance, SMEs, in providing medicines to Africa, et cetera, et cetera. So I get a lot of I'm very excited about the power of entrepreneurship. And if you look at, if you sort of for a moment put ourselves into Silicon Valley, or, I'm lucky to be at Harvard this year. I'm spending many weeks at Harvard. Even at Harvard, we have, 90 faculty of Harvard are doing social enterprise. And at Stanford and the Silicon Valley, you have some of the incredible examples of, Pierre Omidyar, Jeff Skoll. There are many philanthropists who have started to create new ventures and new hybrid models to address these kind of issues. So I think that I like to see this agenda of these partnerships and this convergence in a slightly wider setting. So yes, of course, governments, yes, of course, traditional corporations and NGOs, but also the social entrepreneurs, the new ventures and the new entrepreneurs. And then I want to say something specific. I got involved only really a few months ago into the B Corporation. The B Corporation is a rating system started about 6-7 years ago from the United States, which has expanded in South America. We have Gonzalo here from Sistema B, which is the sister organization in Latin America. And there are about 800 companies, including Ben & Jerry, Patagonia, New Resources Bank, and of course another 756 or so companies that actually have gone through an assessment system that shows their commitment to 200 criteria ranging from social, environmental, governance, diversity, ownership, in a way what I call sort of standards of excellence. How do we as entrepreneurs measure up to some of these high standards? And I see this as a very powerful movement because, first of all, it allows new entrepreneurs to abide by these values and really commit themselves internally and externally through this brand to what they're doing in the world, which is basically meeting the sort of common good challenges that we all face. Secondly, it's becoming very global. There are 26 countries now that have already approved B Corps. So I was with an Argentinian businessman 2 weeks ago at Harvard. He runs a shoe company, $200 million shoe company. And he said, I want to meet like-minded entrepreneurs like me in the rest of the world. And for mid-sized companies, the SMEs of this world, they are not part of some of these networks like IBLF or like the Global Compact. I mean, a little bit, but traditionally they were not part of these networks. So I see this as a growing network of SMEs, family businesses, people who are really passionate about their work and they have a purpose in what they're doing. There's a very strong movement that complements this kind of debate about how do we get governments, NGOs, and multinationals to work together. So this is just a complement to this whole agenda. But I want to make 2 more points. 2 things I haven't really heard in these 2 days. 2 words. One word is innovation, and the other word is power. Now, innovation, I think innovation is critical in actually meeting these challenges. And very often, the new enterprises, well, we know much of the innovation comes from new enterprises. So we need to include these entrepreneurs and these companies into this agenda. And sometimes they've been excluded. You know, I was actually partnered with the UN in the 90s before the Global Compact. And I saw how the Global Compact, for the first years, basically was only a club of big multinationals. It took 6, 7 years before SMEs were invited to be in the Global Compact. And even now, you know, it's really the big CEOs of big companies that get the limelight, not the small kind of guys. And that's unfortunate. So we need something like the B Corp for the SMEs of this world. So innovation. The second is power. You know, we don't talk about power, but the fact is, as you see, you know, even 2 or 3 days ago, there was this interesting article in The Economist. A lot of these Silicon Valley entrepreneurs have decided they have to go and have an impact on Washington. Politics is not working, you know, and that we know too. You know, so when we talk about government, we have to realize that our governments are not working. The politics of today is really old-fashioned conservative politics. Secondly, very often governments, and I say this with the experience and also as someone who has always, in a way, loved the public good side of government, governments have been quite conservative. And in many countries around the world, there is issue of corruption, issue of basically I sit in my place here and I have a sort of antipathy towards people who come up from the entrepreneurial world and think they have all the solutions. And even in Europe, you know, I've been a member of the board of Ashoka in the Netherlands. It took 3 years of discussion, and it didn't work at the end because we had a lot of resistance from the public sector in the Netherlands. They basically said, what do you want to do? Social entrepreneurs solve the social problems? We already have everything worked out. You know, the bureaucracy, the schools work, the hospitals work. So you do get this kind of issue of facing governments that sometimes are not innovative enough. Having said so, I have, I think that, I and others have found a solution, let's call it a solution, is that governments work at different levels. And actually at the city level, it can be very effective. So I am actually at the moment creating 2 accelerators in the city of Rotterdam and the city of Cape Town that actually is working with the city government. And I've seen very exciting models of city mayors and government bodies at the level of cities. You know, the C40, which Bill Clinton started on climate change, very, very interesting. In the United States, you know, mayors like Michael Bloomberg and others, the governor of California, Jerry Brown, fantastic work they're doing. So the question is, how do we as entrepreneurs identify those level of governments that are much more hands-on, directly connected with the people, and with the kind of agenda of change that we want? And sometimes at the national level, it's a different thing, and you do get stuck in the bureaucracy sometimes, and of course, as we know, the global agenda is also quite stuck. So cities, yes, that government, that level of government. And also in some regions, you know, city for me means city and region, provinces. There is a lot of, you know, even the UK now, the UK I think has been divided into like 14 or something regions. There's a lot of this happening at the regional level. So that, that's about the issue of government and working with government. And then finally, I wrote a few concrete things here. There's a big word that we haven't perhaps used enough, and that is sort of system change or thinking systemically. Now, thinking systemically, this agenda is absolutely spot on, but not so much as everything you do as a partnership or a formal partnership, but everything we do as a systemic exercise. That is where this agenda is really very, very powerful. It's essential. So, in other words, you map the space, and you have to know what is government doing, what are NGOs doing, what are investors doing, what are businesses doing, and then systemically you work with each other. Sometimes that may mean working across companies. 2 or 3 companies working with each other can be just as systemically sometimes as working across government or NGOs. So at this level of system thinking, this is absolutely the right kind of agenda. So I leave it there, and then thank you.
Okay, thank you, Marcelo. Rob, let me bring you in now. Marcelo name-checked a few different companies there, Ben & Jerry's, Patagonia. I'd like to invite you to start by giving us your thoughts on how companies can really let sustainability become a core driver of their business and of their brand, and then maybe link back to the topic. I know that until very recently you were chief exec of Fair Trade International, so maybe a few sort of thoughts on the do's and don'ts of the type of cross-sector partnerships that we've been speaking about.
Sure. Thank you, Dougal. So it's interesting when it gets to this time in a conference of this nature. You're right to mention fair trade, because I've spent a lot of time over the last day reflecting back on my fair trade life, which was life-changing. And I don't know about you all, but when I come to an event like this, I think one of the things that a number of people have said is that it feels a little bit like we're preaching to the converted. We're all preaching to the choir, because I don't think there's a person in this room who wouldn't think that the world is in the best possible shape and there's a lot of threats and there's stuff to be done. We're all on the same page in that. And so, you know, we're not necessarily persuading anybody, but there is something about an event like this, which I hope you would all agree with, which is that it's a moment to kind of reinforce what's in here. It's a moment to reinforce one's thinking about the world and understand that one's part of a network of fellow thinkers, fellow leaders, that actually is quite empowering. And we need to be empowered, because when we get back to wherever we're going on Monday, we will need our spirit to be full. So that's a kind of opening to my desire to be just a little bit, if I may, being as it's quite late on a Friday afternoon, just a touch philosophical, because and also one of the other privileges of going at the end of the day, and I'm so impressed, by the way, that this is such a large group of people. I had imagined that, you know, we'd be down to us and maybe an equal number in the audience, so it's great that there's so many of you here. Now, it's probably because it's in Zermatt and it's such a long way to get home. That's what it is. That's why you're all here, because you've got to stay the night, right? So the door's locked. We're here for the night, so the cocktails are coming in and we just keep this going.
We close the hotel door.
There you go. Perfect, yeah. And I believe the cocktails are coming from over there, up there. So actually, I do want to pick you up, though, on something you said at the opening, Dougal, around globalization.
I didn't expect that to be universally popular.
It's not entirely unpopular, but I think that there's something around, you know, the way I've always looked at it is that human civilization and trade have always been inextricably linked. Were it not for our desire to exchange goods and services and monetary value on them to some or other extent, you know, civilization would not have occurred the way that it has. There's something very, very, very sort of profound and fundamental about that. So civilization and trade, yes, linked. Problem is, trade isn't very civilized a lot of the time. The problem is that trade is not very civilized. And so, you know, one of the tasks that we have is to try and bring our humanity back into trade, back into business. And I think if I've really felt strongly about anything over the day or so that I've been here, it's that notion of putting humanity back at the heart of business where it belongs. It doesn't really happen that often. Now, again, also on your point about, you know, globalization and our civilization, I actually think that we as a group, this generation, more or less, I'm feeling a bit old these days, I think I'm 5:30 actually, this generation, you know, we're blessed and cursed at the same time. We're blessed and cursed at the same time. The reason for that is that I think it's fair to say that we have never, as a human race, known so much about the present-day state of our world and our environment and the state of the human condition globally than we know today. We have never known so much as we know today. That's an extraordinary point in human history. We know so much about the conditions that our fellow human beings live in, and we know so much about the damage that we're doing to the planet. More than that, we also can predict far more about the future than we've ever been able to predict before, because we know from the models how much is locked in. We know that we're locked into a 2-degree increase in climate. We know about the aging population. We know that 1 in 20 people are going to be over the age of 65 in 2050. We're not too certain about the numbers of people, but we're pretty confident that it's between 8 and 11 billion. We're pretty confident about the number of people that are going to go to sleep tonight. And I hesitate to use the word go to bed tonight. I'm frustrated at the number of people who talk about hunger in terms of people who go to bed tonight. Many of the people who will go to sleep hungry tonight About 1 billion of them don't have a bed to sleep in. That's the reality of it. So we're at a very special moment when we know these things, and we have to be reminded of them from time to time. So if civilization, if we at this point in civilization, we know so much, we're also uncertain about the future. We cannot be absolutely certain about the way this will play out because we haven't yet figured out how we are going to respond. There's an ambiguity about this moment as well. A lot of certainty and a lot of ambiguity. And why are we in the state that we're in? It's because I mentioned the fact that we've forgotten about humanity at the heart of business. We've forgotten something else as well, something we forget all of the time. We have forgotten that the economy is a subsystem of the ecosystem. We have somehow allowed the economy to be placed above the ecosystem, and it's just fundamentally wrong. We as a civilization are a subsystem of the ecosystem. You know, we should stop thinking about saving the planet and start thinking about saving civilization, because that's what the stakes are. That's what this is all about. We are living a very comfortable life. We're blessed in that sense, but we're cursed in the possibility that we may be the last generation in the developed world to experience such comfort. That's a reality. So, and I'm really pleased, Marcello, that you picked up on the notion of system change, because that's exactly what we've got to do. We've got to reclaim the system. And the only way we're going to do that is by mobilizing business, by mobilizing our NGOs, and by mobilizing popular opinion. And it's going to be very, very challenging to do that. One thing we have to stop doing, and this is something which I hadn't expected to talk about, but since it's come up a couple of times, I'll talk about it. If we're going to put humanity at the heart of business, something we could all stop doing is demonizing. It's time to stop demonizing. I've heard a couple of times today people mention about consultants. I actually heard someone last night say that, I'm not sure if she's here, described herself, and I don't know her name, I apologize, she described herself as an artivist.
Yeah.
Oh, you're over there. Hello. Yes, hello there. So I was thinking about that. I wasn't actually in that conversation, but I heard it as I was passing by, and I thought, oh, that's really interesting. Goes away, Rob noodles for a while, and thinks, oh, how do we... So I'm a consultivist. I'm a consultivist. Look, I used to run fair trade. I used to have a kind of hands-on opportunity to work with folk in the developing world. I had a hands-on opportunity to work with a wonderful group of people in Bonn, and you know, being chief executive of fair trade was kind of fun. It was cool. Actually, it was a complete nightmare at times, as my board chair over there, John Liu, will testify. And now I'm a consultant, and I'm very proud of it. And I know consultants that have done at least as much as many of us in this room to make the world a better place. So I don't like the idea that consultants are somehow bad people. I don't like the idea, frankly, that corporate bankers are bad people. Corporate bankers are mothers and fathers and sons and daughters, friends, kindred spirits. So are estate agents, you know. It's time to stop demonizing people. We need to think beyond those kind of easy labels and think through about what it means to be a human being on the planet in the 21st century. So that little homily said, let's think a little bit about what we mean by sustainability and what we mean by value. We've spent far more time than is healthy in my organisation trying to define what we mean by sustainability. My organisation is called Sustainability. You would think after 26 years we'd know what it means, right? And it's funny, you know, but it's a really rich word to find yourself talking about, long evenings. They just fly by while we debate. You know, is it a just and sustainable world for present and future generations? Yeah, and that's pretty good. Yeah, that's what it is. But actually, I think it goes deeper than that. I actually think sustainability in a civilization context is around three things. It's around peace, it's around security, it's around prosperity. Somebody mentioned last night, what's the point of having a really beautiful city with fantastic buildings if a woman can't walk safely down the streets at night? That's a security issue, right? That's part of a flourishing human life. So I think it goes back to something we all want. We have to find common values as people, and I would contend that three pretty good starting points would be peace, security, and prosperity. Prosperity is an interesting word because it's not necessarily growth. I think an interesting exercise for us all to think about is the concept of growth. I mean, somebody said earlier on in the previous session, and I was very tempted to riff on this, but I'm going to curtail it a little bit, around sustainable growth. I know some thinkers would say you can't have both. You can have sustainability, you can have growth, but it's really difficult to have both. Prosperity is a much more interesting concept, I think. and something for us to think about, how we could be more prosperous, especially as we go through this sort of transfer from our very developed northern Western world as power shifts to the south and shifts to the east. What does prosperity mean for us in that context? That's a pretty profound question. Now, so in terms of system change, how are we going to do that? Well, you're absolutely right. I mean, I'm at risk of repeating what everybody's said before. My organisation has just spent best part of 2 years on a research program called the Regeneration Roadmap. My organisation was around at the time of the Rio Summit 92, and so it was kind of a real opportunity, Rio plus 20. So we decided to create a sort of research program, Rio plus 20, what's happened, how can we think about where we're at, and actually to your point about moving the needle. And I don't entirely agree, and I'll come back to that needle moving point in a moment. So we did this research program. We went out, we spoke to some 25 leaders who've been involved in sustainability over the last 20 years. We held salons all around the world. We had meetings and conversations with people. We did research. We spent a lot of time on it. Guess what we came up with? Trust, collaboration, and leadership. And it's kind of, slightly ironic that we keep coming back to the same things, but it tells me something. We're probably onto something. We're probably right. We have to figure out new ways to build trust. The first way we're going to build trust is to narrow the gap between expectation and outcome. Now, one of the other things, incidentally, we did in this research program was that we looked at where there were high levels of expectations and performance on the key actors, governments, business, civil society, and so on. And what we found was that there are, needless to say, on the part of experts in sustainability, high expectations, but very low recognition of performance on governments and business. But there's a hope that business will come to the fore, and I think it could. So trust, narrow the gap between expectations and actual outcomes. And the way to do that is to find out what the expectations are in the first place. And that means better conversations. And that's really difficult because, I've worked for an NGO, and NGOs aren't very good at having conversations with business. Business isn't very good at having conversations with NGOs. So that would be a great start point. Leadership, and I'm conscious of time, and I know that I kind of figured I might have about 2 minutes worth of stuff, and here we are, and I'm probably 12 minutes in, so I will finish soon. Leadership, quick word on leadership. We believe that there is a concept called extended leadership. And what I mean by extended leadership, leaders like Peter Voser at Shell, or Mark Bolland at Marks & Spencer, Peter Bolker at Nestle, Paul Polman, you've heard them all before, but they are doing some interesting work because they're going beyond the boundaries of their own company. They're standing outside of their businesses and saying we as citizens, as human beings, recognize our responsibility and our opportunity to stand outside the normal construct and start to get new convenings together. Peter Voser's convened 9 business leaders in something that you won't ever particularly hear about, and I hope you never do. You'll hear about the outcomes, but you don't need to know about the collaboration so much, other than where it's taking place and civil society, and citizens working together. We'll maybe come back to collaboration at a later point in this, but I think that there's something else that's missing, and I'll finish here. When we're looking for leadership, we don't want to necessarily look at the Mark Bollands and the Peter Vosers. I mentioned one of the consultants that I know in a big multinational firm, PwC as it happens, who I think is showing fantastic leadership. But I know a couple of other people, one in a bank, Barclays Bank, who has patiently, for 20 years, been chipping away on the inside at that bank. And I think of her as the lead sculptor. There's another person, I won't name her name, she works at Nestle. She's what I also would call lead sculptor. And the thing about lead sculpting, when you're working at the levels that these people are working, is that they chip away. And it's only after 20 years you look back and you look at what they did without being in a position of great power, but by showing leadership day by day, bringing their humanity into the office when they walk through the door in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Father Nicolas Boutet, let me invite you to give us your thoughts, your reflections on what you've heard, some key messages for our audience to digest. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me start with a small story. There was a man once riding a horse and crossing a village, and he was riding so quickly and so fast. And some people asked him, "But where are you riding so quickly?" And he said, "I don't know. Ask my horse to know." And I think that's a problem. Maybe What are the purposes? What are the goals? Where are we going? And that is the main question I think we have to ask ourselves. Where are we going? We can talk about means, we can talk about relationships and building partnerships, but where are we going? What kind of world do we want to build together? And I think there is a civilization, a new civilization we have to build on nowadays. I will talk about that afterward. I will just take 3 remarks. The first remark, I will maybe change the theme of our Congress, and instead of speaking about building partnerships of winners, I would say building partnerships of losers. It's, I think, quite different, of course, you think, but I think we will win something if we start from that point of view, because our purpose is how do we take into account the poor of the poorest of our society, of our world. Gandhi was used to say, my notion of democracy is that under it, the weakest shall have the same opportunities as the strongest. And he said another thing once time, before you do anything, stop and recall the face of the poorest, most helpless, destitute person you have seen, and ask yourself, is what I am about to do is going to help him or not? And I think we have to start from that point of view. The weakness of the society. I have a friend who is astrophysicist, and he was talking with the great paleontologist Yves Coppens. Maybe you know him. He was the one who discovered Lucy. And they were talking about their discovering. And once Yves Coppens said, the most important discovering I did in my life was tombs from 10,000 years ago. I discovered in that tombs handicapped people. Some people were no more able to swallow. Other people were handicapped through accidents or from birth. And he said, I was so struck that in this kind of civilization, they are still a moving civilization, these people were cared, they were taken into account, they were carried, and they were buried with the same dignity than the other one. And he said, for me, it is the emergence of humanity. It is not the tools, it is not the drawing on the cave, it is the taking into account of the poorest of the poor. That is the emergence of humanity. And I think we have to think about that nowadays. How can we let the humanity emerge again in the taking into account the poor of the poor? And I would say we can see from the point of view also this poverty, our own poverty. I don't know who you are and how do you feel, but I feel myself really poor. I said I learned English in the Home for Dying People in Calcutta. So that's the reason why my English is so not so good. But I think I was really challenged by the people there, you know, because they were poor people, but they were challenging me about my own poverty, about my own vulnerability. And I think we have to start from that vulnerability. How can we join our vulnerability to build a new world? And I think if we work together from that poverty, from that weaknesses, from that vulnerabilities, we can experience each other and find in our world, I think we will win a new world. And then we will be winners, really winners, because we are acknowledging the reality first, and the reality is poverty, vulnerability. And taking into account in our reflections this vulnerability, we will really change the world. Not everybody has the occasion to work with poor people, of course. In some enterprises, in some corporation, you are dealing with people who are from another point of view. But still, we have to take into account this gaze, this understanding of the poverty. You know, there was a man once visiting, how do you say that, a carrière, a quarry? Une mine? Quarry. And he saw different person. There are 3 persons with a stone in front of them, with a hammer, and cutting the stone. And he asked the first one, he said, what are you doing? I'm cutting a stone. And he went to the second one, and he said, what are you doing? I'm earning my life. And he went to the third one, and he said, "What are you doing?" And the man looked at him and said, "I'm building a cathedral," you know. And so we can learn from our small actions how to build this new world we want to build. We talked just before about knowing, the grace of knowing so many things in our days. I still remember the Nobel Prize of Peace, Dominic Peer, it was years ago in the 60s, and he said once, knowing without acting is criminal, and acting without knowing is stupidity. And I think we have to move and to link together knowing and acting together. The second remark will be about the grace of our times, the failures of ideologies. I think we cannot have now a new model of the world. It's too complex. The complexity is too great, too difficult to find out a model. You know, Churchill was used to say, if you put two economists in a room, you get two different opinions, unless one of both is Lord Keynes, in which case you get three different opinions. So maybe we can have different opinions about how to build the world, how to change the world, how to conceive the world. But I think it's no more possible to think it as a model of development. And therefore, the great chance, opportunity of the globalization is to go back to the personal responsibility. Of course, in organizations, in different level of responsibility each one of us has, but it's really challenging each one of us. We have to implement ourselves, to implement our ideas, to implement our purposes, to implement our values in our concrete life. And we need for that boldness. We need for that really the courage to do that. I think the most important virtue today is really the courage. We need courage, boldness, and the cowardness is so well spread around the world that we have to change a little bit. I was very surprised. Alan Greenspan said once, at the root of the crisis, it's human nature. Unless somebody can find a way to change human nature, we'll have more crises, and none of them will look like this because no two crises have anything in common except human nature. And I think it was a good confession for that man to acknowledge that behind everything, we have the human person. We have a person who has to decide. We have not only structures, we have not only boards, we have persons, individuals, who have to take into account their responsibilities and what do they want to do. That's the reason why changing minds and hearts is so important. We really need to go out of that way. And I've read once this quotation, we have all two lives. The second life starts when we realize that we have only one life. That means that the awareness of our responsibility, the awareness, we said just before, Robin said, we have at 5 p.m. some of us here, other maybe 7 and other 3, but still we are running on the end and down. And so how do we take into account this reality? And how do we do something good with our lives? The seriousness of this life, this responsibility we have. There is a German philosopher, Peter Sloterdijk, and he said, he wrote a book about you must change your life. And he said what the gods said before, what the priests said before, what the people, the wise people or the philosophers said before, you have to change your life, comes from the crisis today. The crisis is pushing us to change our lives. It's a new authority saying to each one of us, you have to change your life. And Gandhi said also, we must become the change we want to see in the world. We must become the change we want to see in the world. So that's the second remark, the personal responsibility. That's the great opportunity of the new crisis, of the globalization, not to let us try to think about new models. The complexity of the situation is too large, too difficult, that we have really to commit ourselves in this change. And the last remark is, to build a society, to see the purpose of the society, to see the goal, to know where we are going. We need some scale of values. And I think every society was built on a certain scale of values. The first one is the spiritual values. Second one is the cultural values. The third one is the political values. The fourth one is the economical values. And the fifth one is the technical values. And I think if we do not respect this scale of values, it will be very difficult to have an order of peace, an order of true development in our world. And on a personal level, there are very good researchers in the United States who work about not only the IQ or the EQ, the emotional quotient, but about the SQ, the spiritual quotient, the spiritual value. Because if you can have a great empathy, you can have a good capacity of being in a relationship with the other. But you need in your own life some values who will guide you all through the life, in your private life as well as in the public life. And this coherence of your values, this coherence of your life, needs this SQ, the spiritual values, which transcend your action, which transcend the way where you are. And I think we need really that. When once I asked the Dalai Lama what was surprising him about humanity, and he said men, because they sacrifice their health in order to make money, then they sacrifice money to recuperate his health, and then they are so anxious about the future that they do not enjoy the present. The result being that they do not live neither the present nor the future. They live as if they are never going to die, and then die having never really lived. And I think that's a good reflection about that. What are our values? The values we can die for, and the values we can live for. Both are the same, I think. The reason why we can die is the same that the reason why we can live and act and commit ourselves in this world. That was a great reflection of a psychiatrist, Viktor Frankl. He lived for 4 years in the camp in Auschwitz. And he was there as a prisoner, of course, but also as a scientist, trying to find out the reason why some people were able to live and others were dying so quickly in that place. And it was not the strength of the people. It was the meaning of life. And he discovered that there are 3 levels of finding of meaning in our lives. The first level was the self-realization, the work, the action, the job, the activities, building something. The second level was love, to find the family, to love your wife, your husband, your bride, or whoever. And the third level was the transcendence. And he said for him at the beginning it was love. He was longing for finding her spouse when going out of the camp, and she died in the camp. And he said at that moment, I understood that the transcendence was the only meaning of life that I cannot lose, never, never. And so I can lose my job. I can have a failure in an enterprise I will build, but I can never lose the transcendence in my heart. And that's the reason why, and he was, as a Jew, taking this cry of Jonah from inside the fish where Jonah was praying the Lord, in my distress I called to the Lord, and he answered me. From deep of the realm of the dead I called for help, and you listened to my cry. And that was the response. And he founded afterward a therapy, a school of therapy. He called it this logotherapy. He was a student of Adler, of Freud. So he knew very well the psychanalyst at that moment. But he discovered this new way of understanding the meaning of life. Can we give to the people a meaning of life? He said once, ever more people today have the means to live, but no meaning to live for. And I think that's a great challenge. And the last point, when Pablo talked about the way, where are you here and where are you committing yourself? You know, a Greek philosopher, Aristotle, said you can build a society with justice. And justice can prevent from violence the society. But it's impossible to make a community only with justice. You need friendship, you need love. And I think what we need in our world today is love, to love one another. It's not just a theory, it's not just an idea. It's really a concrete action. Do we really love one another? Do we really love the people we are working with? Do we really love the people for whom we are working? Do we love even the one we do not know in the world? 7 billion human fellows all around the world. Do we really love them? And is that I would say, the inner motion that pushes us, that press us to act and to work? There is different meanings of loving, you know. Once a young girl from Senegal wrote this poem, "You tell me you love the wind, but you shut the window. You tell me you love the rain, but you open your umbrella. You tell me you love the sun, but you wear a cap. You tell me you love flowers, but you cut them. You tell me you love birds, but you put them in a cage. You tell me that you love apples, but you bite them. You tell me you love dogs, but you hold them on a leash. So please understand my fear when you tell me I love you." How do we find the inner strength to love one another? And I will end with this story. Some parents told me 2 years ago, they went to me and they said, we lived such an experience. Their young daughter was 3.5 years old, and she had blood cancer, leukemia. And so the daughter said there is only one way to save her, is to make the transplant of bone marrow. And the only donor could be the brother. He's 7 years old. So try to ask him and to explain to him what happened and have his agreement to give his bone marrow. And the parents sat in the saloon with the young boy and explained that his young sister is about to die and we can save her with this transplantation. And they said, "Do you agree to give your bone marrow for your sister?" And the young boy said, "Oh, it's a very tough question. I have to go in my room and to reflect on that and to pray." 7 years old. He came after 10 minutes and he said, "Okay, I agree. When do I have to die?" He didn't notice that it was just to take a little bit. He thought he had to die to save his sister. It took 10 minutes to decide to die for her sister. 10 minutes. We should have done shorter, of course. And I was so impressed. The parents were crying knowing that. 10 minutes to decide to give his life for his sister. And I think that's the way we have to change the world today. We have to commit ourselves in where we are put in our responsibilities, but to have this global vision, to have this vision with the poor at the center, and to not only to escape our poverty and our vulnerability and the poverty of the world, but to tackle with them, and then to build a new world, and then the peace and the joy of heart will come at that moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You're a hard act to follow, Father Boutet. And I was thinking of trying to bring the conversation back to time frame disconnects and setting achievable goals, and you've just raised it to a higher plane. Okay, I think we do have some time for some questions. So if anybody would like to take the opportunity, we've got a lady here. We can bring her the microphone. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I think the amazing panel. The reflection for me is really, the engagement that business leaders or political leaders are going to take, in my view, is based on the way they construct their own vision of the world and what it is they see in the world. Do they see the world through traveling in business class, going to nice airports, which I do also all the time. You know, you go to India, you go to the next nice hotel, you go back to the airport, and it's India, right? And the thing is really, how do you see the world you live in? I took recently some of my colleagues from India. We were together in Paris at a meeting, and I took them in my Paris, which is not the richest neighborhood. We walked in the street, and they were shocked to see all the people living in the street in Paris. All the poor people sitting around, you know, families, kids, whatever, they were shocked. They would not know that Paris. And when I go to India, they never take me to see the poor. So we created in my company that project where we look at olfactive preferences of the poor, which you're going to find crazy, but we're a perfume company, so you have to do that. And I'm building on what you said. When you start talking to the poor, sitting down with them, spending time in the house, that's changing your life. But then, if you need your CEO to understand that this project is important and the company has to change because these people are going to be his clients in the future, you have to have him sitting with them. And I think we said that a few times in the conference today, but all we're talking about, in my view, is not about reports, is not about words, it's about experiencing it. It's about how much you're going to feel this world that is very violent, very difficult, very emotional, and I think a lot of them are just scared to go out there, even to go out there in Paris, okay? So I think for me it's all about the experience of poverty, the experience of violence, the experience of what this world looks like. So then they will absolutely have to take decision because they are scared for themselves as well.
Mark, is it your view that business leaders in general are squeamish about getting their hands dirty and going down to the bottom? Or where do you see it happening?
Well, I think it has changed. Actually, interestingly enough, the IBLF actually had a program called Crossing Boundaries, which was actually around taking leaders and putting them into these environments to actually be as part of the sort of awareness-raising process. And in fact, I did it myself about sort of 8 years ago with the program myself. And I do think that if you look at the situation now, I do think that business leaders generally are more aware of the world around them. But too often, they are still flying in and out of a country. It's very interesting. If you take India, which has been a place where, because of the trends in global outsourcing, probably more business leaders have been to India in the last 5 years than probably ever before in history from around the world. And I guarantee you that very, very few of them have been outside of the hotel or the trip down to the centre they're going to see. And I think that actually it's really important. And certainly, I mean, one of the things that I found, which was valuable for my role, because I founded in Accenture something called Accenture Development Partnerships, which is the part of Accenture that serves the development and NGO community. And one of the things that I did was I would commit a week a year to go and visit programs and projects that were being done through ADP around the world, which is my first experience deeply of seeing things in my own life. But I also encourage my other colleagues on the board to do the same thing. And actually, it's very interesting that I retired 2 years ago, but almost a month after I retired, the chairman and CEO rang me up saying, "I really want to go on one of your trips like you did because I really want to understand this too." And I think that awareness, and there's a certain amount of self-awareness in people now that it is part of the mix you need to have. And I think back to my concern about some of the younger leaders coming up now, is that actually we take some people who start off incredibly inspired, very concerned about the world. We put them into these large organizations where actually they realize that for a very long period of time, they're not getting exposed to any of that. And in fact, they're getting some of that crushed out of them by the machinery of different kinds of incentives and objectives. And then how you actually kind of re-expose them, particularly as they're taking on management and leadership roles, at the point where so that they're going to be able to actually use those senses at the moment when they have to make a tough call, to make the right call. And I think it is about, for me, I also ran the development program for our top account leads in Accenture, the top 100 account leads. And the whole of that program was about how to make them think like that, rather than thinking like this. Now, how you make them not be worrying about whether this account made 20 million that year or not, but worrying about where was this account going, where was the business going, what were the issues they're going to deal with, what world were they living in. And in fact, increasingly I said to them, the best conversation you'll have with the CEO there will be a conversation about this kind of stuff, much more than going to the CEO and saying, I have a great idea of how you can break into India. Much better to talk to the CEO about what he's passionate about, if he's passionate about some of these development goals, because that's actually a way you can actually bond in a different way.
Okay. Rob, and yeah.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because some more questions. Firstly, you're absolutely right, and my fair trade experience showed it again and again and again, both for my own development, but also if we wanted to make a breakthrough with a particular organisation, there's no finer way than to get a chief executive to come out and see where the bananas, the coffee, the tea, whatever, are coming from. In fact, it was a source of constant amazement to me how little companies know about where their products come from that their businesses depend upon. I mean, it's astonishing, really. I was amazed, but it's true. The other thing which is worth mentioning about this is that it cuts both ways. And actually, it's really empowering for people in other parts of the world to get a chance to see where the coffee goes. And it was a very empowering thing for local communities to have representatives from those communities come and see, you know, in New York or in London or in Cologne, you know, where products like coffee or tea actually end up on supermarket shelves. It's a real, you know, really good thing to try and do that. And now an advertisement. There's an organisation, you mentioned IBLF used to have a programme, there's an organisation, one of our partners called Leaders Quest, which does a lot of this kind of work, not only taking leaders to the developing world, but also empowering and developing leaders in the developing world. And it's a very simple website, it's leadersquest.org. End of commercial.
Okay. Marcello?
No, I wanted to say that, in fact, I experience it all the time. Many of the social entrepreneurs and the people like, you know, Wolfgang is here from LGT, the impact investors, they actually start from the ground up. So there are many social entrepreneurs that actually come from some of these poor areas of the world. And there is also, within this wider space, a whole movement towards base of the pyramid business. I was 2004 in San Francisco. There were 1,100 people with C.K. Prahalad and many others to talk about how can our businesses actually serve the poorest of the poor. So there are these sort of perhaps still quite fringy, but nevertheless coming into the mainstream, which I think are very encouraging.
Okay. Yes.
Maybe sort of follow on with this more controversial question. I mean, there are a lot of challenges out there. I mean, that's the clear conclusion of all of this. You know, when you look at the Millennium Development Goals, you know, the many areas that these try to cover, and now the next level. And I think that's also one of the reasons why leaders get confused. You know, because you know, what is the issue? What's the key issue? You know, I mean, is it poverty? Is it water? Is it human rights? Is it climate change? The list is long. So, you know, just putting it provocatively, do we need a focus? I mean, could we say, look, let's resolve the water problem? You know, and not sort of say, I mean, we had a lot of discussions today about all these actions going all kinds of directions, you know, and there have been overlaps and there have been sort of actions that contradict each other. I mean, where do we get the focus in all of that? Because leaders usually look for focus, you know. I mean, it's nice to take them on an experience, but I think ultimately you need to give them a focus. Some companies manage to do that, but I think overall there is a lot of confusion, you know, and I don't think we're resolving it by adding, you know, the Sustainable Development Goals upon the Millennium Development Goals, because it's a long laundry list, you know. Sorry, I mean, that's what it really is.
Okay. Marcello?
Can I go? I like to say that actually, from a perspective of, I think that Rob was mentioning this, we've never had so much knowledge in the world as we have now. We also have never had so many free agents, people who, from nearly anywhere in the world, you know, the world was, until about 50 years ago, really divided ideologically. And even now, even in the last 10 years, there were a number of countries that moved from dictatorship to sort of relative freedom. So there's never been so much potential in the world. And I think that that's a really encouraging sign. And I see many of these young entrepreneurs with incredible visions for what they would like to do. So yes, there are challenges, but there are also a lot of positive things happening. And so that gives me a lot of hope. And I think that the example that I think Lady Mrs. Margarinos brought up was a piece of the whole bigger picture about, you know, we from the West may be going to some of these countries experiencing life firsthand. And also, at the same time, many of these countries that perhaps until a few years ago we from the West would try to go and help, now can help themselves. I mean, there are more Indian entrepreneurs now doing work in India than, of course, Western entrepreneurs. And this is going to grow continuously, over the next 10, 20 years. So that's globalization. That's a beautiful thing of globalization.
Okay. Rob? Yep.
Yeah, I've got a lot of sympathy with the question. Can't we just simplify it? And I'm sorry to say I've got bad news. The short answer is no. And it's because they are systemic challenges. Somebody mentioned earlier on today, can't we fix child labour? And we need to take a long-term view. And I can't remember who it was who said it, but it was 20 years was a sort of horizon. Look, we've been at this for 140 years and we haven't fixed child labour. And one reason, because it's systemic. It's systemic, and without wishing to make it too complicated, you won't fix child labour in West Africa until you fix cotton subsidies in the USA. Because there's a systemic linkage between the two. The cotton subsidies mean that West African cotton is too cheap, you can't get a good livelihood out of it, families suffer. That's why children are trafficked into the cocoa industry. The cocoa price is too low, it's always been too low, companies haven't invested, etc., etc. However, maybe we could make things a little bit simpler. There are three outstanding issues that I think, if you wanted to pick them, first, nutrition, second, climate, and third, education. If we really focused on those three, I think we might get somewhere. And the second interesting way to look at it is figuring out the levers of change. And we need to think more about public policy. I mean, there's a lot of, I've been pressing the case about business, but we shouldn't overlook government. We shouldn't overlook regulatory bodies. And actually, one of the key roles that business can play is advocacy. Advocacy for changes in public policy. Getting an effective price on carbon, for instance, would be a key lever of change. So we need to find what those levers are. And then we need to, I think possibly we could pick 3 or 4 issues, but I don't think we can take one in isolation and say, let's just drive at that.
I think that the point about it, we have these big, complex systemic issues, is true, and absolutely, you definitely can't oversimplify this world, as you definitely find out from all the work I'm doing in the aid arena. However, I think that if business is going to engage particularly, I think businesses do actually need to bring some kind of focus to their activities, if only to avoid further proliferating all the agencies that are engaged, and in providing clarity and being able to use the weight that a business can bring to bear truly to make a difference. My personal view is that you should be able, if you're able, to very clearly define how the core of your business can have a social purpose, how the core of your business can have a social purpose, and you connect the dots on that, I think that, and make that the focus of what you're trying to do. So, for example, say an Accenture decides that the thing that it mainly does is actually recruit and train and develop lots of people around the world. That's what it does, basically. That's why it's got 280,000 people in it now. So its view was, its social purpose is around training and developing people and making them able to get jobs. That's going to be its social purpose. And it will direct its activities in this area around that goal. It doesn't mean it won't do other things that are interesting as well, but it will direct its core focus around that. And I think there's a real opportunity for businesses in general to find a core purpose, a social purpose to their core, and make that a central focus, and then actually they will help them choose which things to get on board with, because there'll be ones that will be aligned to those goals.
Okay, thank you. One more question, yep.
I just would like to make suggestions here. Talking about proactive humility, I would say that we should not try to bear the weight of the world on our shoulders. And I think we should start from where we are. We should try to do our best, but we should try harder. That's it.
Okay, great. Now, I'm going to ask the last question to all of you. I think a number of you and at earlier sessions have bemoaned the fact that you're preaching to the converted. So my question is, what needs to happen to get these messages out on a mass industrial scale? Is it naive of me to expect that Greenpeace would want to trumpet to their members and supporters the fact that they're working with Coca-Cola on this refrigerator initiative? I mean, or can they be persuaded to shout from the rooftops that they're working on these kind of partnerships? Is that the answer, or have you got a better idea for how the word can get out that we can accelerate progress on sustainability challenges through partnership and collaboration? How can we do that? Marcello, start with you.
Well, I think that there is a quality element about doing this kind of work. So I wouldn't be comfortable in saying, let's ask everyone in the world to start doing partnerships. I think it's a selective kind of thing. And also, it's very personalistic. Someone said, it's very true, it isn't so much a government working with the corporation, it's about the leaders of this organization working together. So I think that, yes, we have to go up and expand this movement, but let's do it selectively. If each one of us were to go home and say, I want to find 10 people who are going to work with me on this, we'll make a big impact.
Okay. Mark, how do we get the news out?
I think, first of all, you've got to rely on the leaders. I think the leaders have got to be bolder in actually being comfortable to get the message out, building on that last point. But I think it's also about who are they talking to. And I think the leaders need to be finding a way to talk to the people who are going to be, if you like, the final beneficiaries of this activity and engage with them so that then they can actually hear from those beneficiaries how they can best help them. So I think it's about turning this around. It's not about us broadcasting. It's about creating an environment for listening and then connecting the dots and driving leadership.
Okay. Rob, what would you add to that?
I think it's a really interesting question. And I think one thing that we all need to do is, at the risk of using a slightly trite English expression that my daughter would use, we need to get over ourselves a little bit. And I think that's true in the NGO community as much as it is in the business community. I mean, coming from fair trade, the ideologues, dyed in the wool, just found it really difficult to engage with business. And I look at other NGOs, and I think too often the survival of the organisation and a mission that might have been appropriate 25 years ago is still kind of in the way. So that's what I mean by getting over ourselves a little bit. And it's true in business too. But to the specificity of the question, we sometimes forget the power of business in terms of the number of people that business employs. You just mentioned, how many Accenture employ?
270,000 now.
So on the average basis, that let's suppose every one of those 275,000 people has got interaction on a daily basis with 4 or 5 people in a family of some sort or other. I mean, that's a pretty good multiplier. Think about Barclays Bank, 140,000 employees. Think about the supply chains. We need to kind of mobilize from within a little bit, I think. Greenpeace has got how many members? Yeah, I mean, start thinking about those memberships. And so it does take some courage on the part of leaders, but I think business could do more with its employees. And one other thing as well, hands up who has some kind of pension plan in this audience here today, some kind of pension plan. And so we're all the owners of businesses. I don't trade in shares, but I'm an owner of businesses because I've got a pension plan. We don't quite remember all the beneficiaries enough. So the system is there because we're all owners. We don't take our ownership responsibilities quite strongly enough. We just need to mobilise. The possibilities are there. We're just not mobilised.
Okay, great. Father Boutet, you're our spiritual leader on this panel, so I'm expecting you to be quite strong on this issue of how we can be more evangelical about these issues and how we can get the word out to society as a whole.
There is an old story about how to let a donkey drink if it doesn't want to drink. And there are different possibilities. You can beat it, you can try to push it, to force it, but it will never drink. There is another possibility, to put on the right-hand side and on the left-hand side 2 donkeys who are thirsty, really thirsty. And they will come to the water, and they will drink, and the donkey in the midst will drink looking at the other drinking, And I think we need model, we need leaders, we need people who are committed, who are enthusiastic in this challenge, in this world to change. And with these people, we can move forward.
Great. Well, we've been very lucky to have on our panel a group of people who are enthusiastic and committed and dedicated. Thank you all very, very much. Give them a round of applause, please.